Okay, we're going to talk about this add-on. We're working with 277. Art Paint Tools is the name of the panel, but I've got it named Blender Paint 2D, but I need to show you how to go about setting it up. Patrick did a lot of work on getting this right. He has it now where you can press the default button and bring up border crop and guides, and you can turn those on. You can also change the angle of rotation there from 15 to 30. I've named mine Blender Paint 2D, but you can name it whatever you want. You can name it whatever you feel like working with to remind you what you're doing. You can call it 2D session, whatever you want. When we turn it on, it creates a 2D session in the 3D workspace. What I mean is that you're actually able to bring in this image here. Here we're in GLSL, so there's no lighting. We need to change it to shadeless. And the add-on works with Blender render only right now. Pressing the button there for the camera actually brings up a camera that's orthographic mapped to the image, mapped to exactly the same number of pixels, and it's shadeless and goes into texture paint mode on that canvas. You can see there by rotating around, orbiting, what you're actually dealing with. If you go to the measurements there in the render, you'll find that the scene has changed to the same number of pixels as what is in the actual end panel reading of the image in the 2D editor. So that's pretty cool, being able to look at it that way. So if we maximize up, one of the things we'd see is that when we're in paint mode in the 2D editor, there's no controls for rotating your image. Nothing there for even turning on any guides. Nothing there for cropping from that. Nothing there for actual including grease pencil in your render. At least with the 3D view, you have the ability to put other objects as well as grease pencil and capture them from the OpenGL rendering of the camera. We have here in the 2D editor, you have an XY tiling that would be only for making a tileable texture. But if you're actually wanting to work on, say if I wanted to paint that character from the front view and I wanted to paint on the left side and get the right side to show up the same, I'd have to be using the 3D view, and that's something I'll cover later on. Here we're using the Texture Paint Plus by Bart Crouch, and the W key brings up the brush settings so that you can pick the colors. One thing I'd like to see later is for the ability to use gradient or not, and to set the stops. But that's me wishing, and it's open source, so I need to learn the code better than what I have. The only reason this add-on is working the way it is right now is because I have a friend in Patrick Dupois. He goes by Spiro4D, and he is a very smart individual and is able to fix all my faults. The add-on as it is started out as macros. All these things like the import canvas and the snapshot, the create brush maker scene, the vector mask, the G-pencil mask, all that started as being individual macros that I learned to put together very carefully or very sloppily. Here we're working on painting on the image, and the save overwrite button will save over the image itself, but the increment actually saves to a new increment of the image, and returning it back with that little green button on the right brings it to the last state. So the incremental is loaded up and it is the last save state. So here I'll paint that together and save those two iterations together so that is together in one iteration. That's a fancy way of saying that we don't want to go back and ruin our initial drawing or painting. We want to change over in another version and be able to go back to the original. The snapshot button comes into play when we're really not sure about our committing to something, or we're trying to grab something that's in the 3D view into the painting, like maybe, I don't know, model some brushes, or I'm sorry, model some shapes or specific items, to turn them and add them in, put them in there, and then render it, and then it becomes part of the painting. Here I snapshot and I grab that red area on the chest as a new image, and you can see where we've got our first timer 001, 002, 003, and so here we've changed this to another image. I try to revert it and it doesn't, so I've got to actually use the rotation tool down at the bottom. The rotating it and resetting it puts it back into the state where the script looks for the image state and realizes what's going on. And it's just been like that since it began, and I haven't gotten it fixed yet. We're talking about the snapshot still, but I think you can see now that you can turn around and paint another version, and you can snapshot again, and then you can compare them back for like checking out for look dev. The create brush maker scene and the specials, that one's for actually making a whole new scene. It sets up a 1K by 1K camera with an empty scene, and then you can add whatever you want there to be a brush. The best thing to do is use the transparent background, and I did not use the shadeless material. I got in too much of a hurry, so I save it, but I'll end up using the square brush PNG that I'd already made with the rounded corners. But once you're done with that, you decide you don't want to do any more, you can just delete that scene and it goes right back to your Artist Paint Tools panel, and you're still back in your session. Session's still active, so now we can go in and load up that square brush PNG. We can create our brush. We'll need to set it to we'll need to set it to clip because we don't want it to actually repeat. We'll need to change from view plane to tiled, from tiled to view plane and to rake, so that way it'll follow our brush. And here it's doing pretty well, but I'm kind of curious as to why it's so powerful. So I need to do a couple of things. One is I need to change the size to 1.4. Yes, 1.4. And then in the options tab, you need to turn on the alpha for the texture, and you'll see it. Now you can see the rotation and you can see the size of the brush. And right now I've still got the size turned on in the tool, so I need to turn that off on the pressure so it'll respect the actual size I've already got preset. And the thing is, with using brushes like this, sometimes you get a better effect. So like the default brush is very smooth. This allows me to get a nice cut edge. Okay, the View Align 3D button that's underneath the Create Brush scene, that one I have to cover on a different video. It allows me to select a face in the 3D view while I'm still in texture paint on a 3D model, but using the face select masking, by selecting that face it actually bumps back to edit mode, uses the View Align top view to that face, and then you have his increments of negative and positive 15 degrees rotation for that. Here we're talking about the border crop. After you hit that lock button to unlock it, you can turn on border crop. In the camera view, Control B will allow you to border select an area of your image. F12 to render it. You can use that as a brush. You can use that as a stencil. You can use that as just an example of what you're doing so that you don't have to send a large file. Either way, it's very valuable to be able to crop in out of a painting and to be able to use it for something else. A lot of times what I'll do is actually crop, I'll draw some basic thumbnails, I'll crop and render them to separate files, then my main canvas I'll clear it back up and then bring those in as a stencil and position them where I want them and scaled and rotated in the camera, put them on my canvas, and then I'll go about actually painting. So it's a very useful tool, not just for cropping a picture down to a certain size, but to actually build content for the work you're doing. The other button there right next to it is for guides. We set up some horizontal, vertical halves, thirds, and then some diagonals, and those come from your actual camera settings. And that's something I don't think that you've got them in every software, but there's usually some sort of guides that you can create. This is just an easy, cheap fix to use them in camera. So if I was actually trying to work with the thirds and trying to bring interest and balance, that gives me something to check with. But Patrick made it to where you can shut them off so that if they're really bugging you, you don't have to use them. Here I turn around and use the line as a guide for placing two lines using the line stroke, and works pretty good. If I was designing something and needing to use perspective, I think one thing you can do to add to this is to use grease pencil to maybe block out some basics against those lines, and then maybe use the snapshot to put them into your painting. Because the grease pencil, like I said, the grease pencil you can actually sculpt, you can actually grab and move and stuff like that now with the new editing. So there's a lot to be said for using the grease pencil as an editing tool. Here, the mirror and rotation keys, the canvas flip vertical is very good for catching yourself on your reference. If you put your reference upside down and your composition upside down, you can avoid just only thinking in the idea of symbols of hands, feet, eyes, nose, whatever. And the negative space is easier to catch because you're looking at it from a different angle. Now, you can paint on that in that sense, and canvas flip horizontal also is very good for making sure that you're not overbalancing left or right, because I'm right-handed. I have a tendency, I admit, to put more form one side, and then when I flip, I'll usually find that I've actually got a weak limp side to my composition, and I'll need that to go back and forth to look at. Photoshop, Krita, MyPaint, and several others have got that for their 2D editing, and I think it's just very valuable. It's very useful. So that was one of the first things I came up with as targets that I really wanted to do, and Patrick was very helpful in helping me get this together. Like I said, I did a lot of rough coding that was very how do I say very rough, but it worked, but it crashed a lot. This is a lot easier, and he's gone through and made it very clean. So here I'm going to fill it all up, and we're going to work on just drawing to show why the rotations are good to use. Basically, if you're working with a tablet, it's not like drawing with a piece of paper and you have issues with trying to get the right angle. So like if I'm trying to draw horizontally and I'm trying to get this nice smooth arc, it's a little bit more difficult because you've got to angle yourself in relation to your pad, or you got to turn your pad. This here allows you to rotate the canvas like a piece of paper, like you would on your desk or your sketch pad, rotating your sketch pad in front of you and getting a nice arc. So this makes it a little easier for drawing wise. It's just a lot easier. It's something that if some of these functions were already in the 2D editor, it would be so much easier even without the layers. But the other thing you can't do in the 2D editor is actual image layers. For right now, we're using the material texture stack as a layer system for creating layers of effects with coloring over the top with alpha. This frame constraint keeps it inside the camera. Patrick created that so that it was renderable that way, and so it's just a matter of actually working with it. I'll find some ways to use it with other objects. I think it'd be pretty easy. Here I'm going to work with the canvas mask tools. vector mask. We'll have to name it. That's a new thing that he's made to where it's reusable as a mask. Press OK, and we're going to scale it down, and I'm just going to make a random shape. Control clicking outward will make a shape that he can then fill. Problem I got with that one thing was that I guess I manipulated the rotations too much, and it confused the image which direction it was at. So we'll go to edit mode and unwrap it again from view. So tabbing to edit mode, U to unwrap, and we'll choose project from view. That's just a fix. We'll go back to texture paint, and now once we actually start painting, we should start seeing an effect inside the mask. And I don't think I've got, yeah, I need to get rid of the texture so I can just use the flat brush, the soft brush. So you start seeing it inside, and once we get enough painted in to show the use, then we'll be actually getting rid of it. We'll take it to an object mode, and we'll move it to the layer and reselect our canvas for paint session. You get in pretty close. It's very good for masking, but the actual size of your image determines how good your aliasing is in your masking. So if you can handle it with your system, it's better to work with like 16-bit PNG versus 8-bit PNG, or even go 4K, do something bigger. Here we're using the grease pencil, and we're going to set it to edit, and we're going to use Shift E to use the smooth sculpting. Shift E brings up the sculpt brush, which looks like a circle brush, and so we'll just run across it, and we'll clean up all that little bumpy artifacts that come up from having the pencil just jerk around. Grease pencil is going to get better now, but for right now I just use the sculpting. Then I'm going to also switch to grab and move it around a little bit to show you how you can adjust manually. So Shift E also brings up the grab. So we'll put it out there, put it around a curve so you can see how it could be applied to actual use. And if that's good enough, we'll go ahead and disable editing, go back to our panel. We'll need to select our canvas object again, so because the option's not lit up because our canvas is not selected. Once it's selected in texture paint, mesh mask from grease pencil will work. You name it, so I'm going to put it GP1. Hitting OK. You don't have the highlight going on that, but you can definitely find that mask. And here you go. There's going to be sometimes with the very odd shapes, the fact that the grease pencil has to create so many little triangles to work. Because of that, those triangles will sometimes cause it to have projection problems because they're so small. We'll need to make sure that we've got a close-up to get it to where it works, and you might actually be better off once you've got the bulk of it done and coming in and cleaning it up after the mask is gone, when you're dealing with just the solid plane. Okay, like that, we're going to go to object mode, move it to another channel. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get the mask inversion working. I'll have to experiment with that, but that is an option. It's supposed to work basically the inversion of the vector mask. So if we were to create a vector mask, then press mesh mask inversion, it would actually give us everything but the inside of that mask, and then we'd be able to drop it in and work outside. And the whole point of naming them is so that with the outliner you'll be able to actually go and find those things again. So I tried again with this, and tried to do this mishmash conversion and it gave me an error twice. And like I said, it could be that I just did something wrong. I maybe should have started with a brand new mask, but we'll get it worked out. Incidentally, I've got this on my home piece, on my home Linux box, and I've got it on my work Mac, where I work, and I use it for painting just all the time for anything I'm working with. Sometimes, like even cropping, I do things sometimes that are maybe simpler in other software, but I find ways to get around and do things, and uh, that's kind of the reason why we got this right now. The stencil mask is basically you would actually bring up an image that you would map there, that you would paint another image to use as a mask, and that's the stencil mask tool. That's the actual painting tool of the mask. And I have to do a video on just that, I think, because it's very, very powerful, but I need to work with it a little bit more. So we need to maybe cover the idea of doing the mirrored painting or axis painting. So you need to go to edit mode to set your cursor, but what I forgot, you turn on symmetry, so it's symmetry paint. What I forgot to do was to go to object mode and set my origin to cursor. So when I start painting, nothing happens. And that's when I realize, oh, I need to go back to object mode. So we'll go to object mode and set origin to cursor, and now go to paint. And that works pretty well. It's very useful for getting a blockout of color, especially on a front view. This is pretty good for doing look dev. You're not sure about painting what you're going to work with. This actually will help out with like this project I'm looking at. That's an actual sculpt that I was working on, and I'm not really sure where I'm going to go with it, but this is actually a very quick way to work out several different iterations of what can be done. So in concert with the iteration and the snapshot, this is something that could help me myself actually work out some color palettes. Bringing the final images into the edit 2D editor, you can load up the colors as sampled palettes and then work on the 3D object. That's pretty much it as far as covering the what the panel does. The thing that you can, and an incremental save will keep that there, and so we didn't lose what we did, but we also didn't lose what we already had. That's the key thing there. On top of that, once we clear that, it gets rid of the session and gets rid of everything affiliated with. So it clears out your file, and you can work with your 3D objects separately. And you can still load your images back to 2D editor and do some finessing. You can load them in the compositor, work with them there. Alright, thanks a lot.